There we go. I'm going to record this session. Welcome, everybody. Wow, I have the power to mute all as well. That's pretty impressive. Okay, good to see you all here. So we have some combination of MBA students and some undergrads as well, which is excellent. So good to see a combination of Point Loma students coming to this MBA Innovation and Entrepreneurship Network event. So I'm very stoked to have you all here today. We're going to be conscious of Kevin's time. So we're going to be starting here at 4:30 on the West Coast, the best coast. And then so Kevin can get to his evening events later on. So I'm going to actually hand over the reins to Jeff. Now, Jeff is an alumni of Point Loma's MBA program. What year was it, Jeff, that you graduated?
God, you always do that to me. 10 years ago. Yeah, somewhere in
there.
there.
No, it wasn't 10 years ago. I'm not that old. So
I don't know. It was like 8. I don't know. It was 7 years.
It was a while back, but still actively
Yeah.
involved. Also introduced Jim Long is also here. When did you graduate, Jim?
I was in the first cohort. 2003 is when I finished.
Wow, you don't even look a day older than 55. And of course, Jennifer's also
That's
here.
what I am, 55.
And my recent graduate is also part of the network. So as I said, I'm going to hand the reins over to Jeff to introduce our guest speaker for this evening. So Jeff, you can take it away.
Thanks a lot, Randall. I get the great honor of introducing Kevin Robbins to the group. I am privileged to say that I met Kevin in a work capacity probably about 5 or 6 years ago. He actually took some ownership stake in a company that I was helping to grow at the time. And I immediately gravitated to Kevin in terms of his honesty, his transparency, his leadership and motivation. So immediately right out of the gate, I knew that Kevin was a stellar individual and would lead us to where we needed to be. Let me go over a little bit about Kevin before turning the reins over to him. Kevin is currently a general partner at Blue Delta Capital Partners. I hope he explains this next piece to you all here, which is a growth stage venture capital firm focused in U.S. government services market. That will mean something very specific that hopefully he'll describe to you. Kevin is also the co-founder of Wolf Den Associates, a leading strategy and management consulting firm in the government service sector, and Dark Wolf Solutions, a leading provider of DecSecOps and cybersecurity solutions to national security and Fortune 500 customers. So right away, you can tell that you can tell why he's here as an entrepreneur, currently running 3 gigs and probably even more that I don't know about or is not on his bio. Kevin also holds an AB in economics from Dartmouth College. And Kevin, I don't want to take any of your thunder. I know you have a great story. Turn it over to you for like a 10-minute intro and then field a few questions.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. And appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody tonight. It's funny, if you start a couple things and you don't put any of them on the wall early enough, people start asking you to speak about sort of what's the secret. We'll cover a bunch tonight. I will tell you that I prefer a lot of Q&A to set piece. I do not want to brief people into submission, but I'll give you the spoiler alert up front. There's no magic pill. It's like diet and exercise, right? It's a lot of hard work, a lot of luck, and a lot of knowing where to pick your spot. To the point of, I think, with some of the where you guys are in the semester and with your projects, figuring out how what your spot is to pick and how you articulate that to somebody is critical. So, I appreciate the intro, Jeff, as always, probably too generous, but what you left out is I'm an only child who cannot follow rules and cannot pick any one thing to do, which is sort of how I wound up here. The quick bio for folks. I was a liberal arts kid, had no idea what I wanted to do, thought I would just go get a good liberal arts degree and figure it out along the way. I did not figure, stunner alert, whiling away 4 years in the woods of New Hampshire with a lot of days on skis and a lot of beer past my mouth. Did not self-reveal a career. I wound up on Wall Street because that's what my friends were doing. actually really enjoyed it. I was an investment banker in the 90s, working on a lot of .com companies. And I always admired the guys that were guys, it was all guys then, there were not a lot of gals, starting companies in their garage, mortgaging their houses, maxing out multiple credit cards. And I looked at them and thought, those guys are insane. I don't have that risk tolerance, but I just want to be in their aura, right? I want to find a way to help those guys execute on their dreams. And so helping them raise capital was about as close as I could get to them without actually taking the leap myself. Burned myself out pretty quickly working the proverbial 100-hour weeks. It's all fun and games. Everyone wants to be an investment banker until you call your mom on Christmas morning and say that if she could just have the roast ready closer to 6 than to 3, you might be able to make it home. Not a fun call to make. Migrated over to private equity because for me it was staying in that same vein of helping entrepreneurs scale their companies, but with a little better quality of life, right? It was 60, 70-hour weeks instead of 100-hour weeks. And I will tell you that by and large, that's true. I actually absolutely love the 5 years I spent both at GE Capital. It's pretty powerful when you're taking money straight from Jack Welch's balance sheet and putting it into whatever you really want. And then at ABS Capital in Baltimore. And I thought I was on a pretty good glide path, honestly. I thought, I went to the right school. I was lucky enough to get into Wall Street in a hot bull market. I survived, Russia defaulting the last time they defaulted on their debt, the market shutting down, the .com collapse, 9/11, was back on a tear. And then I had at the time, I did not appreciate this advice, but a great mentor, Phil Clough at ABS Capital, pulled me aside at my annual review and he said, "So I think it's time you get a real job." I said, "Phil, I've been, I've got pretty gaudy W-2 for a kid that's not even 30 yet. What do you mean get a real job?" And he said, "Well, you've never actually done anything. You've advised people, you've provided services to people." He said, "But you've never had to be on the giving end of a board brief. It's a lot different than being on the receiving end of a board brief." And his message wasn't that I didn't have a career in private equity. It was, if you really want to do this, you need to be able to spend some time as an operator and put yourself in their shoes. Because it's a lot different when you can use the past tense possessive pronoun to describe an experience than just sort of saying you should or I would. So that was a tough pill to swallow. It led me down the path of wound up in the government contracting space, which was not a space I ever thought I'd wind up in. I'm politically a libertarian, and so working for a government contractor felt anathema. To me, those looked like slow growing, low margin, non-differentiated butts and seats services companies, and I kind of didn't really get it. And had a great, again, another mentor that pulled me aside and said, "You don't get it. This is a sector that makes up a quarter of GDP. There are tens of thousands of companies. It is an extremely rich tapestry as its own sector. If you come here and do our deals, we'll teach you the sector." And so I learned the drudgery of government contracting and spent 5 years doing that. And while I was there, realized that there was really a gap in the market. And that's sort of how, what kind of led me to in 2009 to walk away from W-2 income and hang out my own shingles is more appropriate. What I saw was the government contracting space was transforming. With Obama coming in 2008, we really changed the way the government buys everything. No longer did you have to buy everything from Lockheed and IBM and big companies like that. All of a sudden, the Obama administration democratized IT procurement. Anybody who could bid on and if you could write to a solicitation, you could win a contract. And throwing open, kind of flattening the entire sector, created all the opportunity in the world, but there was way more opportunity than there were companies that knew how to take advantage of it. And so I spent time writing a business plan for could we create a consultancy that was started by folks that were practitioners that knew what good looked like, were used to competing and winning against Boeing and Lockheed, Booz Allen, people like that, but now would offer our services for hire as mercenaries to all of these small businesses that all of a sudden had the opportunity, but not the aptitude to go compete and win. And so that again, because of my experience working with and investing in small businesses at GE and ABS, coupled with 5 years of learning the ins and outs of how the government market worked. I just sort of saw it, and it clicked, and I was busy with polishing that business plan and trying to convince my boss to come join me as employee number one, when another buddy called me and said, "Hey, who finances these government contractors?" I said, "Well, there's really not anybody. It's community banks and it's buyout shops. There's nothing in between. There's no growth capital. There's no expansion stage capital. You can sell your whole company, or you can take out a senior bank loan. There's nothing in between. It's the only sector in the world that doesn't have that." And he said, "So this is a buddy who had been a partner at Carlyle and had worked at InQtel, which is the CIA's venture capital arm." He said, "Why don't we do that? Why don't we start that company?" I said, "Start what company?" He said, start a venture firm that does expansion stage capital for government contractors." And I said, "Look, Mark, I love you like a brother, but you were a partner at Carlyle. You've got carried interest in those investments. You have sidecar investing you've done in companies like Palantir. Your wife's a vice president at Silicon Valley Bank. I'm a single income household with 2 kids and a mortgage. I don't have the bankroll to do that. I can't do it." And so he and I and my partner from the consulting firm, Barry Landu, sat down in the backyard of Barry's house in August of 2009. And I said, "Well, I'm pretty convinced that both of these companies should exist. There should be a venture firm that focuses on emerging government companies. And there should be a high-end consultancy that puts them on equal footing with the big guys. Should we do this together, or what should we do?" And we decided quickly that it should be 2 separate companies. And so that was 13 years ago, I guess now. And I will tell you, it was a sobering moment to kind of walk myself out of my last day at the government contractor at 6 o'clock on a Friday night and drop my employee badge in the visitor's badge bin and take my banker's box of, kind of pens and desk trinkets to my car and drove home. And I paused in the driveway for a while thinking, what in the hell did I just do? I'm literally about to walk in the house and see the wife, the 2-year-old, the newborn, and there is no safety net. There's no savings. There's no income. It is Friday night. I got to figure out by Monday morning where that income's going to come from. So maybe a little more background than you wanted, but hopefully that's helpful so that people can use that as fodder for questions to pick kind of where along that journey you want to drop the needle and hear more.
Thanks so much for the background. It's great. And I can't wait to the summary piece of this, where we can figure out where you're at now and fast forward that 13 years and hear how it all worked out for you. So I'm gonna go to a couple questions I put together for you first before we go to the ones from the students. I just wanted to know, based on your experience, are there common characteristics, attributes, and qualities that you've noticed in other successful entrepreneurs along your journey?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot. People say, "Hey, what's the 1 or 2 things that you think are critical to your success?" One is, I think it's almost impossible to do by yourself. There are very few examples of an entrepreneur that started out on their own and was a success by themselves, right? Even folks that we know, we like to celebrate, the Elon Musks of the world. If you go back and look at the bio, he's always had his brother and other business associates with him. He gets all the limelight. He's outlasted a lot of those folks that were, solid state boosters that got him into orbit, pun intended. But if you don't have other people on the bus with you at the outset, it's almost physically impossible to do it, because in the early days you're thinking, you're selling, you're delivering. Oh, by the way, you have to bill and do the back office too. It's almost insurmountable for anybody to do it by themselves. And so the first thing I'd say is figure out somebody else you trust with complementary skill sets to help you on that journey. The second is, and sort of selfishly, I think we do too much romanticizing entrepreneurship, and people go into it lightly. it's absolutely brutal. I've got a good friend who actually just sold his company, and he said, being an entrepreneur is like chewing glass and getting punched in the face at the same time. And I said, well, I don't know if it's that bad. No, you don't think it's that bad because you're 13 years in. Remember year two. I said, oh, come on. It was 11 years ago. I barely remember. He's like, exactly. Just like people don't remember pain during childbirth. The corollary question people ask me, Jeff, is, okay, if it's that hard, how do you know when it's time? How do I know when the time is for me to take that leap, to do that long drive home, to face down the prospect of no safety net, no income? And the way I describe it to people is, you cannot anticipate how much self-doubt there is when you go on your own, right? Especially now, right? I mean, I started in 2009 during the last recession. People now, with the Great Resignation, we will have, the end of this bull market at some point if we haven't already technically had it. The switching costs are pretty low during a recession to go do your own thing, because the whole world's unemployed anyway, and so you're just another person with a gap on your resume. But to push beyond that, as an entrepreneur, every cocktail party you go to, every wedding, every family reunion, every Thanksgiving dinner, people ask, how's it going? And they may be genuine and empathetic in their attempt to truly find out how you holding up. You will not hear it that way. You will hear it defensively. You will hear it as an ad hominem attack, as a challenge to your life decisions. And so when people say, how do I know when I'm ready for that gauntlet? I say, well, how do you know when you're in love? They say, well, I don't really know how I know. Well, I'll tell you, it's at some point you switch from, I really want to spend time with that person, to, I can't imagine not spending every day with that person. You have to feel that way about your idea. It has to switch from, I think this would be a cool thing to do, to, I would rather not take another breath than this thing not come to fruition. I have to cause it to exist.
Outstanding. Thanks, Kevin. I'm gonna switch. Starting to have some questions come in. Field one from Nick right now. Taking that leap without a safety net is quite the risk. Would you say the decision is the same with or without it?
Yeah, and I will admit that I'm a little bit more chicken shit than I may have stated, right? So before I took the leap, couple things. One, the flash to bang on the business plan was, I wrote the business plan for Wolf Den, which is the consultancy. I wrote that Labor Day weekend, 2007, at the beach. I was just I couldn't take it anymore. I reached the point where the idea had been rattling around in my head so much, I had to get it down to a business plan so I could think about anything else. It was crowding out literally every thought I had. Happened to be a rainy Labor Day week at the beach, by the way. It took me from that late August, early September 2007 to October 2009 to get conviction to do it. It was not, while it felt like the flip of a switch, it was premeditated. It had been rattling around. I had stress tested it. I had looked at differentiation. I had thought about competitors. So it was not exactly like I just sort of had a bad day and quit. That's one. Two is, even with all of that, I was nervous about, what if it doesn't work? I did not have runway. It had to work fast, right? I probably could have, home equity, credit card, and borrowing against retirement savings, I probably could have lasted 90 to 120 days. That was about it. That was about what I could handle with no income coming in. I went ahead and interviewed for, I played it forward and said, okay, if this doesn't work and I'm back in the job market in a quarter, what job am I going to want? And the job I wanted was to be corp dev guy at another government contractor. I couldn't go back to the one I left, right? Nobody wants to go tuck tail and go back and say, hey, remember that great idea I had? Didn't work out. Will you take me back? So I actually played all the way through interviewing and getting a job offer for the exact job I would have wanted had it not worked out. And we had a very funny conversation around the dinner table. I said, so I don't know, now that I got that job, it's kind of interesting. I get to start up my own corp dev team at a big publicly traded government contractor. It's carte blanche, right? I hire the team, I set the policy, I define the strategy, I pick what I want to go buy. That's a pretty cool job. That's a material bump up from where I am. And my wife just sort of looked at me, she goes, "You're not going to be happy working for somebody else right now. You've been working for 2 years on this idea. If you don't go do it, you're going to kick yourself. So I'm glad that you feel like you've packed your reserve chute. Now you can go ahead and take the leap with the confidence that while you don't really have a safety net, there is a plan B if you need it."
Mhm. Great.
That's great feedback. Thank you, Kevin. To be honest, my plan B is getting this MBA, because I'd like to be an entrepreneur, but I'm fully aware of the fact that I could very well fail and lose everything that I have, and I'd still like to eat and live somewhere. So I said, this will help me potentially get a job if I lose it all, that I need to start over. So,
and like I said, right, there are, despite historically low unemployment, the Great Resignation has resulted in a lot of folks right now that are just sort of out of the workforce, because we sort of can't afford to be right now, right? And so I don't know that if people look back, a year from now, it'll be more than probably 2 years from now, there will be a lot of people that have a gap in the resume, and the gap will be filled with all sorts of other personal development things, right? There will be startups, there will be, traveling, there will be life events. I think it'll be a little bit like, folks that were working in finance in 2009 having a gap in their resumes. Like, right, we've laid off, half of the financial community. I think that it will not be the scarlet letter that it used to be.
You've mentioned that Great Resignation, and if you don't mind if I ask one more question, you mentioned that Great Resignation. I think I've heard that term once or twice before recently, but I haven't really well defined it or read too far into it. Is it because people are leaving a job to go to another job, or do you feel like there is an uptick in entrepreneurial efforts and people are leaving their desk jobs to go to them?
So this is where, I was a classically trained economist, so I will try and keep it from being too wonky here. A lot of the Great Resignation is people switching jobs. But what's different this time is we actually have people falling out of the workforce right now at a pretty high rate. And some of that is gig economy. Some of that is entrepreneurship. The official labor statistics don't actually track that, so it's hard to tell. It's as we say, the plural of anecdote is not data. But it feels anecdotally like there are a lot of high performing, very employable people that are falling out of traditional employer-employee relationships right now, because they're not fulfilled in their current work. They've realized that they can be quite productive as independent consultants or entrepreneurs on their own, working from home or from a fantastic VRBO. They don't need the traditional employer-employee showing up to a physical location every day kind of experience. So I do think that, a lot of, if you listen to public company earnings calls, they'll all blame the Great Resignation. It's sort of like, okay, you can't retain your people. I get it. But some of those people are not just going elsewhere. Some of those people are truly falling out of the labor force right now, that's not fair. Falling out of the official statistics for labor force tracking.
Kevin, I'm going to ask one.
Go ahead, please.
I'm going to ask when Mike has a similar question to where Nick was going, a stretch further though. What advice would you offer to someone who is afraid to leave a stable gig for an entrepreneurial unknown?
Yeah, I mean, that was basically me coming out of college, right? I don't think I looked at any of the companies that were recruiting on campus and said, "Oh my gosh, that is what I've always wanted to do with my life." And so, I had always admired, entrepreneurs. I came from a family. I mean, my dad was an internist, so he was a sole practitioner. So he was a small business owner. All of my great uncles were sort of the greatest generation, right? So they all came back from the war and started their own businesses. So I had a great uncle that was owned a gourmet grocery store in DC. I had a great uncle that owned a car dealership in Richmond. I had one that owned a formal wear store in Baltimore. They all came back from the war and had to sort of fight. There weren't necessarily jobs. They had to create their own. So I think I'd always sort of grown up around, idolizing entrepreneurs. But I was definitely not ready to make that leap. And part of it was that I didn't feel like I'd ever actually done anything. To as much as I did not like hearing that from Phil Clough in 2005, he's dead right. If you're I was a decent enough student to coast through high school with good grades, got lucky in an admissions office, coasted through, 4 years at Dartmouth. I was never really battle tested. I didn't really have any practical skills, right? I could read and write. I had some critical thinking, but I had nothing that people should have paid me for. And so, long-winded way of saying, kudos to people that are scared. You should be scared. You should not go into it lightly. You should take a real, internal inventory of your skills and figure out, is there something you're really better at than somebody else? And by the way, the better at could be you have an idea. And the thing that's positively addictive about entrepreneurship is ideas don't know age, they don't know experience, they don't know race, creed, color, gender, sexual identity. Ideas are just ideas. And there are a lot of issues in our country. I will not go political, I promise, but there are a lot of issues in America today. But the fundamental reality is, if you've got an idea, there's almost if it's a good idea, there's almost uncapped upside in this country for that. There's limitless upward mobility, and there's an incredible petri dish of folks that are looking for ideas to fund, to scale, to make into fruition. And that's not the case universally around the world.
Thanks so much for that. I'm going to go back to one of the questions I had, and then we'll go back to a couple other student questions. There's a lot of advice out there for entrepreneurs and innovators, but what specific tips would you point somebody towards that either were successful for you or people around you?
Yeah, the one, and I know there's a question about sort of where you go to get that first financing and how do you make yourself attractive to investors. The one thing that really gets my goat is, and I'm not alone on this, having the idea is awesome. Show people, don't just say it, show them that you have the courage of your conviction by putting your money where your mouth is. There are so many decent ideas that land on the cutting room floor because the entrepreneur doesn't put their own skin in the game. They don't invest in proof of concept out of their own nickel before they take it to a broader audience. And I'm not talking about IP theft and things like that. I just mean, whenever somebody has an idea or they bring a business opportunity, the first question anybody's going to ask is, okay, how much of your own money have you put into this? And if the answer is sort of a pregnant pause of, well, I haven't really yet, it's like, okay, that's fine. How long have you been working without an income, putting sweat equity in to make it happen? Because those are functional equivalents, right? Time and money are the same. And so that's one piece of advice I have is having the idea is awesome. Finding a partner that you can go into business with together is a necessary condition. And then before you take it to anybody else, you almost need to exhaust your own internal resources, where it will be very hard to convince somebody else to commit theirs.
Thanks for that. Going back to a student question, from what you've shared with us thus far, would you change any part of what you went through initially?
Yes. I changed a lot of things for sure. But the number one thing I change is, again, when you leap out of the plane, you hope that you're going to find a parachute on the way down. The minute you start having success, you instantly become risk averse again. It's human nature. It's an age and wealth effect, right? When you have nothing, you have nothing to lose. The minute the business starts being worth something, it is very hard to keep playing like you have nothing to lose, because all of a sudden you do have something to lose, right? I remember, the first time the annual checkup with my wealth manager was not, oh my God, you're putting more money into those businesses? From where? The first time it was, holy shit, you got to check back. He goes, what are we going to do about, retirement savings? I'm like, retirement savings? this was going to, for 4 years in a row, you've lectured me about how I'm pissing away all my savings. But the minute that it starts generating cash, the minute it has, real worth, even if it's paper worth, right? It is very hard to keep playing like you played when you were risking everything or risking nothing. The two sides of the same coin. And so I made my life a lot harder for myself by not being willing, when the chips started coming back in, I was not fast enough about bringing other people in to help. I was slow to hire other people in the business because they looked expensive. I was slow to hire in the back office because I thought, well, I've had a good couple quarters or a good year, but what if that doesn't obtain next year, and then I got to pay them before I pay me. It's another one of my partners says, you're an entrepreneur when you've had to sign your own check on payday and put it in the desk and not cash it for 2 weeks. So I would have pushed much harder if I could go back and do it all over again. But I say that from the position of 13 years in, and it's working, right? I think
Right.
in the moment that would have been really hard advice to take.
Mhm.
And look, what is the consequence? I work more hours. I see my family less. I have a shittier work-life balance because I've got religion now, but it's hard to just bring somebody in and hand off parts of the business to them. And the point where you realize you can't go another step without doing it is too late, because then you've got to make it through transitioning them on as well. And so I would say, be willing, when you start to have something that's actually worth something, to play like it wasn't worth anything at all. Keep pressing that aggressive front-footed posture.
A lot of that resonates with me, Kevin, as you'd guess. Even when you bring them in, you have to be willing to let go, right? I mean, it's not only bringing them in, it's about letting things go and kind of let people make some mistakes and such. The next question, Kevin, I'm gonna actually paraphrase it a little bit. So the student's asking, how does Kevin empower Black, Indigenous, people of color, women, entrepreneurs in this field when they are a minority? So I kind of twisted some of the words, but that's the bulk of the question.
Yep. So a couple things. One, Wolfden is 45 W-2 employees, so we are not subject to any of the Labor Department requirements for EEOC, et cetera. And I give that preface not to turn into a legal conversation, but to say that we are not mandated to do anything. Everything we do is purely voluntary. And at Wolfden we have, and you've been a customer, Jeff, so you know what Wolfden's like.
Yep.
We have two rules at Wolfden. One is customer first. The other is best idea wins. You can do anything you want at Wolfden. If you violate one of those two, we walk you out. The beauty of those two rules is we've got a pure meritocracy. We have a culture of dissent. We expect people to challenge everything. And when you do that, it breaks down a lot of barriers, right? When the 20-year-old intern feels empowered to challenge the 60-year-old subject matter expert, all of a sudden, a lot of the traditional, patriarchy starts to melt away. Now, I will tell you, Wolfden is still very much white male because the sector we operate in is white male. It's taking a while to turn the government contracting space over. So what do? We actually recently, about 2 years ago now, I guess, we revamped our recruiting process. We used to go to the same two schools every year because we had alumni there. And I started looking at the write-ups from the students that we were extending offers to, and the commentary would often be things like good cultural fit, or seems interested in the job because they knew so-and-so. And it's hard to see confirmation bias. I think we've all gotten better at it the last 2 years. But it dawned on me that if we're only going to these two schools, and if we're favoring people that knew folks that are already here, and if we're gonna allow people to extend or decline an offer based on cultural fit, we are never going to turn this business around. And so we started going to schools we never recruited at before. We started targeting HBCUs. We started talking to folks that were in, women in science or other affinity clubs at those schools to try and gin up resumes. And we changed the way we ask questions in interviews. Instead of saying, where have you done this job before? We said, what skills does this job require? Can you demonstrate those skills, right? Because the traditional approach is, oh, we couldn't hire that person to be a project manager because they've never been a project manager before. That's how you perpetuate the current situation. If you instead say the core skills for being a project manager are attention to detail, organization, et cetera, et cetera. Let's go recruit for that. Let's screen for that. Give me resumes and interview write-ups that reflect that. So that's at Wolf Den. I think we're making a turn now. We are by head count, we are I believe we just achieved potty parity. So we have an equal number of males and females in a sector that's probably about 90% male. We are still not terribly much of color, although our CEO is an Asian female. That's a recent appointment back in January, July of 21. So we are making change happen by changing the way we recruit, changing the way we look at promotion criteria, and forcing ourselves to try and ask questions that are cognizant of bias. But it takes time, and we are working in an industry that, it's, you don't get a consolation prize for being, quote, more diverse than the whitest, malest sector on the planet, right? Blue Delta is different. Blue Delta, as a venture capital firm, we can fundamentally change the world. We get to pick who goes on our boards. We get to pick who our CEOs are, and we are able to affect change much more quickly there because it's a completely clean slate. And so, if you look at our boards of directors, we have more first-time board members than anybody I know of. We typically have 2 independent directors on every board of directors. We favor people that are sitting on their first board, which means most of our independent directors are female, are minority. We have a lot of first-time CEOs. Not all of our CEOs are non-white males, but very many of them are. And if you look at our C-suites in aggregate, so think CEO, CFO, COO, we probably have about a third of that is non-white male, which again, in a sector that's 90% white male, stale male and pale, we say, that is starting to turn some heads. And what's been fun for us is people are now coming to us saying, hey, you're doing something different. Tell me more about, how you got to this. And we're not throwing it out on LinkedIn. We're not raising a fund to just back minority-owned businesses. It's all absolutely on the merit. But we have removed that first sort of fallacy question of, well, you can't be a CEO. Where have you been a CEO before? Or you can't be a director. Where have you been a director before? And when you remove that barrier and start saying, well, what do I need in a director? What are the criteria to be a good CEO? Now you've thrown the world open to a lot broader pool of candidates. So long answer there, but it's a hot button topic. There's no easy answer to it. We could do better, I'm sure, but I'm pretty proud of the track record we've had so far.
That's great. Thanks. I'm going to ask. You touched a little bit on mentors earlier, but I have a question teed up. Is how important are mentors, lawyers, and accountants in startup business endeavors?
In that order.
Okay.
Growing up, my mom used to call me the 2 gumball kid because she said that every single time she gave me a nickel to put in a gumball machine, 2 would come out every time. I have been extremely lucky in my life, and I had a great mentor who was a teacher in high school. I had another great mentor as a professor in college. When I got into investment banking, the first MD I worked for took me under his wing and taught me everything. When I got to GE, nobody ever heard of the guy, but John Flannery, who wound up being the CEO of GE. John was my mentor when I got to GE Equity. I mean, hit the lottery there. Phil Clough giving me career advice along the way. I mean, I've been more fortunate than anybody I know to have a string of just fantastic mentors who are willing to kind of put me at their elbow, apprentice me, teach me their trade, put up with all of my questions, put up with, frankly, all of my squealing. I am not a good employee. I am, again, I'm an only child. When people ask me to do something, the first thing out of my mouth is why. And so I've had a bunch of folks that have been very tolerant. So I think that mentorship is incredibly important. I've worked for a lot of people. My farewell note to Phil Clough was, we didn't always get along, but you get a lot more out of me than I would have gotten out of me. And that's important, right? I was never really a big athlete. And so I didn't really have coaches in my life that could push me harder than I would have pushed myself. I was always sort of into social sports. But having those mentors that could push and knowledge transfer was critical. When you get to the actual nuts and bolts of starting a thing, a lawyer is incredibly important. And whether it's a lawyer, an accountant, a lender, whatever, the advice I give to people is do not worry about the price. Getting cheap legal advice is like, getting sushi on sale, right? There's no consolation in that. You want to find, in all of your service providers, find a relationship, find somebody that you trust, somebody's going to go through the wall for you. If they happen to cost more on an hourly basis, it doesn't matter. On a best value basis, they will more than earn that from you. And so my first job, I had great attorneys I worked with when I was at GE, some of whom I'm still friends with. But when I got to SRA, was the government contractor I worked for, in 2005, my first day on the job, they sent me at 5 p.m. to a law firm in Tyson's Corner because we were closing an acquisition. I could barely spell government contracting. I had no idea what the company was we were acquiring. But it was already signed. It was literally just the closing. Back in the day when you used to do physical closings and put together binders, I said, well, are you really going to send me? And they said, yeah, we're going to send you. I said, I don't know anything about this company. This is my first day on the job. And they said, it doesn't matter. You know deals, and closing binders are closing binders wherever you are. And so, long story short, I wind up at midnight still on my first day in the law firm with the associate on the deal. And, I'm sort of texting my wife explaining how, I thought you were taking a 9-to-5 government contractor job. Here you are at midnight turning deal docs again, same shit, lower salary. What are you doing? That attorney and I became lifelong friends, and he has worked one side or the other of almost every deal I've done in the past 13 years. Actually, every deal at SRA too. So we're almost 2 decades into working on every deal together. And, the wives are friends. We go to each other's houses. I actually had a transaction come up today, and I immediately texted him and said, I know you've got a conflict. How do I get you to waive that conflict so you can work with me on this one? And so getting that trusted relationship, invaluable. And you don't know where to start. You're going to make some bad mistakes, right? So, I would just say, until you know that you found that trusted relationship, tread lightly. And if you were going to waterproof a basement, you'd get 2 estimates. So at least talk to 2 before you pick any of them.
Yeah, Kevin, I literally, as you know, have had some of some of these things in my own life, and you have to be willing to fire a lawyer. I literally retained a lawyer that kept telling me, well, that's standard. That's the most you can get out of this. And, no, that's not acceptable when somebody's negotiating on your behalf. I'm going to switch back to a question from Jeremy. He's providing a little background here. The background: many entrepreneurs fail before success and take several years to be profitable. And he says, here's a similar question. Looking back, any general suggestions for things you could have anticipated or you could have done better in executing and / improving the business idea?
Yeah. So Wolfden actually played out pretty much as we thought. And that's not because we're brilliant. We got a little bit lucky. We also, at its core, we were the internal growth office at SRA for 16 business units, right? So we did all their strategic planning, we did all their M&A, we worked on all their big proposals. So the business plan was really not, you would not win a business plan competition with it. It was simply take what we're doing internally, hang it out as a shingle, and now offer it to the rest of industry. So that was kind of a rigged bet, right? We had to go find those customers, we had to define our offerings, set our pricing, win work, deliver, get referrals. It's not, I don't want to trivialize it, but it was not a revolutionary business idea. So there's not a lot I would say there. Blue Delta did not play out as we thought. I guess we were naive in thinking that two guys who had been bankers together in the 90s and who were good friends, we thought that we could magically define a business plan for a fund that had never been done and convince the world that these two guys who've never invested together are going to start a first-time fund in a new thesis in a sector nobody understands. We thought that would fly off the shelf. And we beat our heads in for about 6 months trying to raise a fund because we did not want to be just two more former investment bankers with a pledge fund, right? They're a dime a dozen. Frankly, they're all the rage right now too. Somebody on this phone is probably working on a pledge fund idea. I don't begrudge you. In fact, I'm happy to talk about it. It's actually much more mainstream now than it was 13 years ago. And it was finally, we went to go see Mark's old mentors at Carlisle, and he said, guys, you don't get it. You're selling illiquidity in a market that creates liquidity. And it was sort of so simple that we just had never thought about it. Basically, we were asking people to take a huge leap of faith and lock up cash for 5 to 10 years before seeing a return in a market where everybody was liquidating everything. And so, what would you do differently there? I think if we had really spent a little more time, we spent all of our time asking, why has nobody done this? And not enough time asking, how should we do this? And that's critical, right? Anytime you go to see an institutional investor, they want to know why this thesis, why now, and why you. And I think we absolutely nailed the why this thesis and why us, and we totally fumbled the why now. And it took us a couple years to finally find our stride. The kind of coda on that story is we actually spent from early 2010 to late 2014, so full 4 years, doing deals on a deal-by-deal basis because we could not raise a fund. So we made our first 9 investments on a deal-by-deal basis, which is a really hard way to live. You basically shake hands with a CEO on a deal, then go find the money to put into that deal. I'm proud to say we never welched on a term sheet. Every time we shook hands and signed a term sheet, we delivered the cash. We did well enough there that one of our early investors in a couple of those deals anchored a fund. So we raised a $50 million institutional fund. It took us 2.5 years to raise that $50 million. $50 million is nothing now. In fundraising circles, most institutions can't write a check smaller than 50 million as a commitment to a fund, right? So it was infinitesimal amount of money in the grand scheme of institutional fund management. It took us 2.5 years to raise it. Made 8 investments there, turned that into a $150 million institutional fund 2 that we raised in 3 months. So in 2019, from basically tax day to the end of July, we raised $150 million. We put that to work in 2 years in 7 investments, all of whom are doing well. And then in 2021, we raised $215 million fund 3, all institutions, so pensions, endowments, and we raised it in 3 weeks. So, we're up on plane now. We probably have about $1 billion of assets under management, which again makes us absolutely a small fry in the grand scheme of private equity wealth management. But we've come a long way from kind of shaking a tin cup on a corner of a DC street trying to find our first couple deals. And had we started there and worked back to all the steps that have to happen to make that work, we would probably not have frittered away our time trying to raise a fund at the outset. We would have just said, you know what? We have no track record. We need to go establish a track record before anybody will take us seriously. And we probably wasted the first 18 months, if I'm being honest, of Blue Delta with a lot of meetings that went nowhere because we, like I said, right thesis, right guys to do it, not the right time.
I'm gonna throw you a little curveball with maybe the closing questions, kind of rolling two things into one. So if you could touch on perhaps how you've been able to, and if I'm going to say if, establish and maintain a healthy work-life balance, and what are really the rewards of being an entrepreneur in your situation?
So I think work-life balance does not exist for entrepreneurs. It exists down the road after a happy exit for those that make it. Along the way, there is no such thing. And it's funny. I guess because I'm still married somehow. I joke we've been married 20 years, 21 years. And I've married my high school sweetheart. People say, "Oh my gosh, you must have figured it out. What's the secret to work-life balance?" And I tell them there is no work-life balance, especially when you start your own company. There is perpetual work-life imbalance. And my co-founder at Wolf Den, Barry Landu, he describes it this way. He says, your goal as an entrepreneur from a work-life balance standpoint should be to make sure that everybody is equally unhappy with you at all times. And I said, Barry, what in the hell does that mean? And he said, well, if everybody at work is happy with you, you're probably not home enough. If everybody at home is happy with you, you're probably not working enough. He said, so your goal should be to keep them both equally unhappy. So that's my comment there. I mean, look, I'll tell you, I was with my family on spring break last week. I probably took about 4 hours of phone calls while I was on spring break. That is rare for me. Last year, same vacation, same place, I took 4 hours a day of calls. Got back Sunday night. I have not been home for dinner one night this week. I normally try to do that. I try and be home, try and see my kids in the morning. They're 13 and 15. I try and be home for dinner. And I just kind of, after they've gone to bed, I turn the laptop back on and I work for the next 4 to 6 hours to get ready for the next day. So you back to what's the upside? Flexibility, right? I don't have to work because somebody tells me that I have to be there at a certain hour. I can make my own schedule, subject to the limitations of you do work for the business, right? And also, it's one thing, I will give my wife a lot of credit here. I was up until 3 a.m. closing a deal, the second to last deal I did at SRA. And she said, what are you doing? Like you have not been to bed before 3 a.m. any night this week. What is this deal? And I said, oh, it's, it's so-and-so's company and we're really excited to be buying them. And she goes, how much are you paying? And I told her. She happened to know the CEO socially. It's a very small community in government contracting. Everybody knows everybody. It's incestuous. And she goes, when is it exactly that you'll work till 3 a.m. to make yourself 9 figures? And it kind of, it kind of blew me back. It wasn't like, you're killing yourself. I'm worried about your health. It wasn't you need to work less hours or I'm leaving you. It was when are you going to do this to benefit you? And that is, for me, the fundamental, driving motive. I can choose to be out 2 or 3 nights. It's my choice. I have to deal with the implications for the family. But I know that everything I'm doing is accruing to unlimited upside for me. Back to my comment before about, the beauty of kind of limitless, upward mobility in America. I know that when we win a big contract, I can see exactly how much that's going to accrue to my benefit. I know that when we have a big exit at Blue Delta, there's a check in the mail for my chunk of that. It is that one-to-one relationship between your efforts and your rewards you cannot get anywhere else except being an entrepreneur. And that, if for all of the kind of scared straight program I gave you about how hard it is and how much courage or conviction you have to have, that is why we do it.
Amazing. Thanks so much. We're about at 8:27. Randall, did you have any questions you wanted to throw out in terms of a last question? Because we don't have any more from the audience, at least that I've seen, and my list is empty. Or Kevin, anything in closing you'd like to say?
That's what I think that's probably, I mean, I'm writing down, you should write a classic quotes book. I mean, there's some gems here, and I'm so glad we're actually
Jeff will tell you I say a lot of things.
Oh yes, he does.
Well, this is definitely an evergreen video that we can be able to upload and have other people watch, because I think there's some just critical and key points you've made, Kevin. So yeah, it's probably just in closing, typically we ask, is there something that from a resource perspective that you continually to watch or read, or how do you keep up to date with where you're going, or how do you put things in perspective for your own self? So just from a final tips perspective.
Yeah, so I don't, this is embarrassing, I don't even read the Wall Street Journal anymore. And it's not, again, not a political statement. I don't have time to consume media in that format. I have the tremendous home field advantage that, while the government contracting space makes up a quarter of GDP, 50 cents of the dollar that gets spent in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And with an industry that's that concentrated, but the Valley is that way, the auto industry is that way. There are certain industries that are hyper concentrated like that. I find that my single greatest resource to make sure I'm current, to make sure I'm staying self-aware, maintaining that situational awareness, I meet with a dozen people a week. I am out for breakfast. I have a breakfast meeting almost every day. I have a lunch meeting almost every day. And I'm usually grabbing coffee on either end of lunch. And it's service providers, it's attorneys, wealth managers, commercial lenders, recruiters, real estate brokers. Those guys leak like sieves. They're all in the flow of knowledge. They can all kind of, it's all value add on Roomint of who's doing what at what company, what talent's coming available, what trends are we seeing. I get so much more out of that there are a couple trade rags that I get daily. But that's how I sort of keep my edges. I meet with that many people a week, many of whom are prospective talent. Those folks that are in the job market can be incredible resources for making sure you're seeing around the next corner.
That, what, I've actually asked that question a number of different times, and that is a very different response that I've actually heard. Typically it's related to podcasts or books or whatever. And I think that's actually even more valuable. And the networks we create and the relationships we build, and with people that you respect in the industry that you wanting to work in, just makes complete sense, right? And you're not only just getting information, you're also building those relationships, and you have an opportunity to open up doors that you probably would never have done if you're reading the Wall Street Journal or whatever the case may be, right? So,
and look, I put my money where my mouth is, right? I'm here tonight. My family's eating dinner without me, given the time difference, because Jeff and I got involved together at Tory, and we had a great run. We both made a bunch of money, and I hope we do it again. But it's a trusted relationship, right? And there's probably somebody on this phone who will reach out to me afterwards. And I by the way, I'm perfectly happy for you to share my email address. I'm always happy to talk to folks if they have questions I didn't get to answer tonight. Somebody on this will probably end up needing help down the road. They might wind up working in one of my companies, right? You don't know. Yep. As much as I groan when I look at my calendar every week and I see it just back to back of overlapping meetings from 8 to 6 every day. And as much as, I get some eye rolls at home when I'm back on my laptop at 8:30 at night till midnight. I almost never regret a meeting I take. I learn something in every meeting, and I'm a kind of a intellectually curious guy, a lifelong learner. And so for me, that's what works.
That's fantastic.
Great.
Well, that being said, obviously, maybe you can make dessert if we let you go now. So we really, truly appreciate it. Jeff, thank you for introducing Kevin, a phenomenal asset and just an incredible person to have with us tonight. So Kevin, thank you again for your time and your conversation with us and your feedback. Thank you to everybody who's joined us. I'm sure this has been just an incredible opportunity to get to know not only Kevin, but just the nature of the ecosystem that he's lived and breathed in for the last 20 plus years, I'd say. So anyway, that being said, I don't want to hold us any longer. Jeff, thank you so much. Jim, Jennifer, thank you very much for making this happen. Again, Kevin, we can't thank you enough. We look forward to, possibly getting connection. We'll share your email address as you've offered that to our crew. And if you get any responses from Point Loma, we'd love you to respond back. So we appreciate it so much for your time today.
Absolutely.
Have a great
Thank you.
night.
Thanks, everybody. Good
Thanks,
night.
Kevin. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.